everyone. Welcome to The Relationship Edge, a podcast where we explore the power of relationships and relationship-driven industries like the private markets. I'm your host, Ablorde Ashigbi, and today we're lucky enough to have a great friend and mentor of both 4 degrees, as well as myself personally, Chris Deutsch. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ablorde. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, well, we will dive right on in. So, Chris, you're someone who spent your career curating your community of relationships. I'd love to hear what's the single biggest win or opportunity that's come your way as an investor that you can trace back to relationships that you have.
There are so many. uh, um, I'll give a fun one. QB, which was a recent exit here in Chicago. I was in their only 2 rounds that they raised, and the way that the relationship initially started was actually as a tenant. We owned a real estate business. That's actually where the name Lofty comes from. My father brought lofts from New York to Chicago in the 60s, and I was a manager of one of our loft buildings in, this is probably 2014 or so, 2015. And Arnav, the founder, walked in to look at some space, and I ended up making I did a lease with him, but we did a deal where it was an in-kind investment through office space. So my first investment with them started as a tenant, but also investor relationship in the company. And since they took space in the building, I got to know Arnav a lot more. And when they had an opportunity to raise their next round, he walked down to my office and asked what I thought about the round. And I asked if there was opportunity to invest more. Thank God I did. And it's been a rocket ship ever since. So, or I should say in 2020, they exited. And it was a rocket ship up to then. And ever since, we've just had an incredible relationship. The 3 founders are all now doing their own angel investing in the next generation of Chicago founders. And all 3 of them, by the way, were immigrants. They met at University of Chicago. So they're all underrepresented immigrant founders. And one of them, Ryota, is actually our first EIR, entrepreneur in residence, for those that don't know what that means, at Lofty Ventures. So I could go on and on. It's kind of an incredible story, but I'll leave it there. But there really are so many of those. And at the earliest stages of investing, it's really all about the relationships. And if it's not for you, then my question would be, why are you doing it in the first place?
No, that's an amazing story, and certainly the QB story here in Chicago is one that we need a lot more of. And so, really excited to hear how that relationship evolved and ultimately became such a successful exit for you.
And their success is spawning more of those. It will spawn more because they're returning capital back into the environment to the next generation of QB founders.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And to your point, those things compound and ultimately create a technology community that
Yep.
supports so many other founders going forward.
Yep.
So you started to speak to this a bit, but in some ways, I'd be curious to hear how much or how you see your relationship network as like related to your success as an investor. And so maybe some frames to think of it as like how much of like what percentage of the deals that you see tend to come from relationships, or how much of the founder support you do tends to be relationship based. Be super curious to hear.
Okay, so before we answer that, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment because you gave me a pet peeve, and this is a good teaching moment. I do a lot of, as you know, mentoring at the business schools, Kellogg and whatnot. So anytime I hear somebody say network, I pause. And I know that you guys probably talk about networks because of what you guys built, but I posit networks are by definition transactional. So I say, unless you're in information technology, strike the word network or networking or anything around network from your vocabulary. Build relationships and build communities. And the quick 60-second on this is, we exist inside of a giant community that we have built for ourselves. And inside of that giant community are these sub-communities that are affinity groups. And each one of those have individual relationships inside of each one of those sub-communities. So I've got a lacrosse community, I've got a founder community, I've got an investor community, I've got an art community, I've got all these different fun communities, family, neighbors, etc. And one of the most fun things to do is take the different relationships inside of each one of those sub-communities and cross-pollinate. and enable somebody in art to build a relationship with somebody in the startup. And so, again, to take a step back, I think words really matter. And when you talk about networking, when you talk about building your network, it's just so mature in the give and take Adam Grant sense of the word. Let's build communities of givers. And those are the strongest and deepest relationships. So if you really want to get, if your ultimate goal is really, I'm building a network because I want to like leverage that network and get value out of it, the long-term view of building deep relationships that have no expectation of receiving something from those people, that's where you're going to actually get the most value in the long view. If you have a short view, then unfortunately I can't help you. But anyway, so I heard network, and I had to soapbox because it seems like the right venue for it. But please re-ask the question because I just like tuned out when I heard network.
You are all good. And so maybe rephrasing that slightly, as you think of the relationships and communities that you've built, I'd be curious to almost talk about the way in which that community has translated into your success as an investor. And so some of the underlying things underneath that were, what proportion of the deals that you see tend to come from relationships that you have, or how much of the founder support that you do tends to be relationship based, or maybe some ways of thinking through that question.
So I love this question, and I'll use a visual aid. Lofty Ventures started as a holding company. It was literally Lofty Ventures LLC because I had to put equity that I was investing or that I had from investments into something while I was still working on our company, Loft Development Corporation. And because my thesis became Chicago, so many of those founders happened to be local. You were one of the early founders because I think it was 2015 or 2016, 17, whatever that was, I invested. Because there were so many local founders, it started to, as I made more investments, we had the ability for them to all get together and meet. So that really became the Lofty family. And so we made stickers. And as we grew the Lofty family, I realized I want to be first check, but not last check. And what that means is if I'm investing 10,000 to 100,000, which is my range, even at the top of that range, I'm probably not going to fill a first round. So I need more investors to come in. And there just have not been enough investors to come in. I could speak to this specifically on QB, but for brevity, I'll refrain. So I realized we need more angels here. So I started building Lofty Angels, which is a community of angel investors. And what's really fun about those two communities is they're merging. Now we're teaching founders in the Lofty family to become angels earlier in their career so that we can create angels over the long term with the best kind of seedlings that you can imagine, founders themselves. So now that QB exited, to go back to our last example, there are no better angel investors out there than people that have been there and done that already and have the empathy and understand what it takes and the blood, sweat, and tears and be able to give that as advice to their the companies that they invest in. So this is a really great example of I invest in the best founders I can find in Chicago. I just want good people. I have 4 criteria: giver, brilliant, giver in the Adam Grant take sense of giver. That's number 1. Number 2 is brilliant. Number 3, you got to be gritty, scrappy, do a lot with a little. And 4, problem founder fit. They have to have problem founder fit. So without getting into that, as long as they have those things and they're high on that, I want to invest. I want them in our community. And now we have 158 of those people in the Lofty family. And enabling those people to engage with other people that aren't founders in the Lofty family, but are around that community. The Troy Hennicoffs, the Amanda Lannerts, the Betsy Zieglers, there are all these great people in Chicago and beyond that we get to enable them to meet. And now with the Lofty Angels, they're also starting to build relationships earlier with these angels that could potentially be investors in this company, the next one, et cetera. So that was very meandering, but I wanted to give it a real life example of how we are actively creating a giant community, Lofty Ventures, but then the sub communities of the Lofty family and Lofty Angels. And those are starting to cross-pollinate themselves and blur the line between what's an investor and what's a founder. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, if I think about the Chicago ecosystem and the benefit of having many more early stage check writers who understand what it's like to build a company. Um, the opportunity there for that's transformative, right? And so it's really exciting to see all that happen in practice. And so, given both maybe that community you have of founders and then all these other communities outside of the founders that you've kind of built up over time, that's a really robust base of relationships that you're thinking about managing, ultimately, strengthening over time. I'd love to hear about how you operationalize that work. So, like, are there practices or habits that you try to regularly perform, or frameworks or approaches that you take to it?
Uh, it's really hard. You guys probably understand the pedagogy more of relationship and community building and management. What's the there's a theorist that says you can only have 100 true who's that
Dunbar's
again?
number.
Right, Dunbar's number. We've talked about this.
Hmm.
It doesn't apply to me. I wish it did, kind of, because it's crazy to manage these many not just loose tie but really strong tie relationships. But that's really the thing. Like, I love that. That's really that's fun for me. So there's a lot of hacks that I use to manage this. If I have a good, if I'm an investor in a founder's company, I'm typically texting with them, and I keep in pretty good text communication with a lot of the founders that I work with, whether I'm sending them invites, like we have an event this weekend. Sometimes I'll send invites to them or people that are outside the community. So I will go through my last couple hundred communications in iMessage on my phone, and that will remind you, oh gosh, I haven't reached out to that person. Like, actually earlier today, so I was sending some last minute invites to our event. I went deep in that. I went into, like, who have I not texted in the last year, just to see, are there some other people, and just going through that process every once in a while, whether that's deliberate or just sort of accidental, is helpful, because to maintain that many relationships is very difficult. There's other tools that you can use as well. I mean, not to be an infomercial, I've been an investor in 4 Degrees for a long time, but clearly 4 Degrees has some great hacks. I've always been a fan of bubbling up the communications and activities that are happening. I can't stay on top of all of the social channels of all the people that I maintain relationships with, and so having something like 4 Degrees monitoring some of that and saying, "Ooh, have you seen this?" No, I haven't. That's super helpful. Obviously, managing inside of 4 Degrees is helpful too. There's also some just like real old school kind of tools that are hard to discount. Sometimes just throwing a quick spreadsheet together for an event, like, that's a really easy thing. The other thing that's fun about putting things in spreadsheets is then you can actually upload those later into other tools and other platforms, because it's actually creating some structured data. But yeah, there's no, like, I wish I could say, like, this is how you do it. This is how you this is the silver bullet. I am a huge fan of investing in companies that attack the problem of relationship and community building. And so I've invested in quite a few. Pair Up, which is actually doing a lot of stuff now with integrating artificial intelligence into Slack communication. Um, uh, uh, Gosh, what are the good ones? Bridge, um, Gamer Jive, which is now Inverse. There's a whole bucket of these companies that I've invested in, that are like super tools that enable people that have large, not networks, large communities or lots of sub communities and lots of relationships they're trying to manage, but really leveraging those tools also to do the cross pollinating. And Adam Grant in Give and Take. It's, by the way, if you haven't read Give and Take, you have to. It's the most important book that I recommend, not as a business book, just in general. I think for most people, that's a lens that we all have subconsciously, but by reading it, it makes it a conscious lens. And he has something he calls in the book a 5-minute favor, which is connecting two people through an email intro. Bridge does that very well. I know you guys have a flavor of enabling and facilitating introductions. However you go about making introductions, use those tools, because it really becomes an albatross around your neck. Like, I used to keep lists of, gosh, I've got 15 people I have to make intros for, and even a 5-minute favor multiplied by 15, that's like, you got to sit down and actually, like, do that. So leverage the tools that exist, whether it's a 4 degrees or a bridge or what have you, to help facilitate these things, because it can take the 5 minute favor down to the 15-second favor, and that's really important.
Yeah, no, it's all super useful and a bunch of great tools in there. Of course, naturally present company included. Um, I'd love to hear, because one of the things you mentioned early on, which makes total sense to me as you think about relationship building, is to do things without expectation of return. At the same time, I'd be curious, there are ways that you're trying to measure some of those efforts, or at least like, the effectiveness of the work. Is that something you spend much time thinking about, or is it not particularly important given the focus, less of the focus on return?
I think there's a huge amount of thought around that subconsciously. I don't think I'm consciously spending any time thinking about that. The subconscious thought that's happening is, was I right? Is this person a giver? Was I right? This person is a giver. So my whole goal in life is to maximize the givers around me. So in my giant community, in each one of the sub communities, that's why my first criteria of my diligence on founders is, are they a giver or not? um, Minimize the amount of takers, and then you just navigate the matchers. So, of the people that I'm really bringing close, the lofty founders, other friends that are in my sub communities, the ones that I keep close are the givers. And so long as when I'm subconsciously asking, sort of constant feedback, was I right? Was I right? Was I right? And thankfully, one of my, I'd say my secret weapon, my secret like Nintendo NES up down right, secret move is, I'm really a good quick judge of people. I've been wrong a couple times, and takers are really good at cloaking their takerness, if you will. As I would give the example of the talented Mr. Ripley, like the movie, they're really good at pulling the wool over your eyes, and so a couple will sneak in. But provided I'm right about those people, no, the magic is setting the petri dish, creating an environment, and then popping in takers. Right? Popping in takers. I don't know what that was. Popping in givers, excuse me,
Hmm.
and giving them an opportunity to just let magic happen. And this is something that you've experienced, Ablorde. I believe you were part of our Worlds Collide meals, right?
I am. I
So
was.
that was a specific example of something we were creating, which I use a term I call hacking serendipity. So I try to compress the amount of time that it takes, and B, set the stage so that you have a huge chance, a huge probability of walking into an environment and having a 20, 50, 100% chance of meeting somebody that creates this amazing serendipitous experience. And so if I'm surrounding myself with givers and enabling those givers across different dimensions, whether it's their job or gender or race or where they're from or whatever, to all engage in these very vulnerable and personal spaces, magic comes out of that. And whether that becomes, they end up doing a company together, they become co-founders that I get to invest in, or who knows what happens. In fact, one of your cohort mates, this happened, from Techstars. I invested in Paladin because a couple of the founders from that company stayed with me on Wikasa, and that was one of the tools that I use for hacking serendipity. So, yeah, I would say the direct answer is no. I don't. I'm not trying to measure that, but the indirect answer is yes. I'm trying to measure subconsciously, was I right? Was my first reaction right? And if they're givers, like that's, I mean, this is just, it's just fun. Like there's nothing more fun than spending your time with really great, passionate, brilliant young people like yourself and all the other founders that I've had the opportunity and honor to be able to work with over the years, and mixing them with other great people in the community is just, it's it's
Yeah.
amazing. I get to make money at that. So
No, that certainly we've benefited a lot from it. So definitely very grateful for it. Actually, I'd be curious. You mentioned one of the first pieces of diligence you do is if someone's a giver. Part of that sounds like it's a quick, reaction based off of the amount of time you spent with people. If you do additional diligence on figuring out if someone's a giver or not, what form does that typically take?
it's just time.
Mm.
So I'm, as an angel, you have to be very. there's two contexts to answer this question. One is just like people in general. The other is like with founders. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna go with the founder piece because I'm an investor. As an angel investor, whether I'm investing at the bottom or the top of my 10 to 100,000 range, I have to realize that the amount of time that I'm spending with a founder really needs to be commensurate with the amount of potential benefit that they're going to be getting from me financially. Forget about like all the other stuff. And I do say on the Lofty website, if the check is the most value that you got from Lofty is effectively me making the investment, then we failed. And but forget that. The most important thing for a founder is cash. So if I'm making a $10,000 or even $100,000 investment, I can't spend 30 hours with them like a venture fund might, or even 5 hours. In some cases, I've got 30 to 60 minutes, and that's all I've got. So thankfully, whether this is nature or nurture, some combination of the two, I've certainly spent an enormous amount of my life, probably deliberately since sometime in high school, realizing, so over 30 years now, I love people. I want to focus on understanding them better. And all of that research that I've done throughout my entire, I mean, basically like a large learning model, right? Like I've
Mhm.
just spent all of my life digesting this data. And now I've got a pretty good model in my brain that maybe was already predisposed to operate in this way because of just, your nature, your genetics. Um, the amount of time that it takes, like the first 5 to 15 minutes, I've probably already got a decent view. 30 to 60 minutes, I'm probably 80 to 90% sure of my decision, or maybe even higher. Maybe it's upwards of 90%. And then over time, it's just like, it's diminishing returns, but maybe you notice something that you didn't see initially. And that's happened a couple of times. And those are usually really, really good indicators to taker because they're trying to put up some kind of a facade. So, thankfully for me, and I think that this is also, I'm going to cross my fingers and say secret to my success because I've only had 5 exits of 87 companies now. A lot of those are pretty young, and it's going to take years to see how a lot of these others do. But I think one of the secrets, if I'm to have success, is this ability and this focus that I've had. And for other people who are thinking about getting into angel investing, I would absolutely say if this is something you think you're good at, then you could be really. It's a way to leverage his talent and monetize it. If that's a way to call it monetizing, you usually think of like I get direct capital. This is like a long term potential monetization, but you have to also be open to making wrong bets that go to zero.
No, they definitely really important lessons for anybody who wants to step into the industry for sure, and an important ability to have. If there's I can't think of a better superpower in the early stage environment than being able to judge people very quickly.
There's a
Uh,
huge but though I want to put on if I said going to zero. The great part about this is it's a financial zero, but that doesn't mean it's a total zero. And what I mean by that is this founder might have unfortunately had to shut down their company, but they're still a great founder. So you get to invest in their next company early as well. And that might be the one that goes big. Or maybe they never start another company, but that founder ends up working at one of the companies that you currently invest in and they unlocks it. You just never know. As long as I'm investing in givers, there's still a long-term win. So even in a worst case scenario, there's a hedge because you're building this long-term relationship with that founder. Whether or not you make a financial return, there's a social and personal and what's the word I'm looking for? Um, uh, it, Emotional return is not the right word, but you're building a relationship with a person. So you're getting like another form of compensation that you're getting their passion, you're getting their love and all. I mean that you can't put a price on. So that's why I said I get that anyway for what I do. It's just amazing that every once in a while I get to have a great exit like you do with QB, and it enables you to do this as a career.
yeah, to your point, relationships in and of themselves are a form of return in addition to the
Yeah,
financial benefits that come from working with great people.
yeah.
Makes total sense. Well, Chris, this has been amazing. I have one last question for you. And you may have actually already answered this in some ways, but I'll ask it in case it's different, which is what is the single biggest lesson you've learned about, relationship building or community building? Do you think most people get wrong or just don't understand?
Um, I think it's what I stopped early on with is that you have to understand, first of all, words matter. And I'll give a funny anecdote. I don't know if you know Esther Barron, who runs the entrepreneurship program at Pritzker Law at Northwestern, but I was giving a talk. I guess you could call it a lecture at her class, her entrepreneurship class, a couple of years ago, and I said, I got on this rant. I said, if you ever go to an event, it says networking in it, avoid it like the plague. And she like said, oh, and I said, hold on, Esther, I'm getting to the part. Because those anything that says networking is going to attract the sales finger gun guys that just want to carpet bomb business cards. Their goal is how many business cards can I lay out there, in 30 minutes. And I said, but if you find yourself in one of those environments, don't try to carpet bomb a million business cards. Say, before I leave this event, I want to have one really meaningful conversation with somebody that could lead to a second conversation, and maybe two. If you can leave an event, whether it's called a networking event or maybe it's not called, I don't like the terminology networking, but if you find yourself at one of those, like that should be a goal. That was a little bit of an example of what I'm about to say is don't think about what you're doing as building a network or networking. You're building a community that you are in the center of. And that community has lots of sub communities. And each one of those sub communities is you at the center with little relationships. It's like a spoke in a hub. And the fun part is enabling those different communities, like a Venn diagram, to overlap. And the value that you bring to the other people in those other communities by enabling you to cross-pollinate, or even inside of a sub-community. It's amazing to me when somebody says, oh, I don't know who's Troy Hennicoff. I feel like everybody knows Troy, or Metalhead, or like some of my friends in the community. And that's when I go, oh my God, you have to meet Ablorde, you have to meet Troy, you have to meet Amanda, you have whoever that is. So even inside of your sub-community, you can do that. But the beauty and the fun and the joy that you can have of connecting to people is just, I don't know. It's, for me, it's like the most simple pleasure in life, and it can really be life-changing. And Adam Grant, if you haven't read the book yet, again, I'll recommend it again, Give and Take. He really goes into some of the detail of how that is such an easy and like costs you nothing kind of activity to do, but can render so much value. So the lesson that I would say is strike networking from your vocabulary unless you're in IT, because packets, are transactional, going back and forth over a network, and really focus on building relationships and building communities.
Well, quite the lesson for us all, and a good reminder for everybody who's listening. So, Chris, thank you again for being willing to take the time. If folks want to find you or be able to reach out to you, where should they go?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Twitter. They can go to loftyventures.com on our website. We also, by the way, I should say, we have a free angel community where we're open sourcing this knowledge, and that's what the Lofty Angels is. So if you go to loftyventures.com, you can find out more about that and sign up. You don't have to be an accredited investor. You could just be lofty. You could be angel curious and just trying to learn more about what angel investing is, either for now or for down the road.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Take care. Thanks, Ablorde.
Sure. Bye.